Have you noticed how messy the settling of differences has become today? With people name-calling, deriding each other, it's become a terrible, messy business of accusations and counter-accusations. And that shouldn't be with a Christian. Certainly shouldn't be in the church. And so over this really short series, what are we going to be looking at is how to deal with confrontation without being confrontational. Well, confrontation certainly has become a messy business, hasn't it? And what we're going to look at is just how to apply some biblical principles to dealing with confrontation. Of course, the circumstances will differ. Depends on the type of confrontation, whether it's just husband and wife, or whether it's in a church setting or wherever it is. We will have to adapt the principles that I share with you today into the particular context we find ourselves in. So the two main parts to confrontation that I want to deal with, that is, first of all, looking at ourselves, the you part of it, and then, of course, the strategies, how we actually deal with confrontation. So 80% of the success for you in confronting another will depend on your attitude. What's in your heart? You see, what's in your heart comes out of your mouth. And so your sincerity, your voice, your tonal, your body language, the amount of emotion you bring into this discussion will actually determine the result of the outcome of this meeting. So 80% of the success of you confronting will depend on your attitude. And so it's incumbent upon us to deal with ourselves first. That's the most important thing. If we go in with any attitude, any hostility, it's picked up very, very quickly. So how you approach the confrontation, the first few minutes of it, is absolutely critical. The question would be, is how attractive is your character throughout the debate? Are you showing dignity and respect, showing that their view is important for you to understand? So those are the kind of things that we need to deal with before we go into it. So we never attempt to resolve confrontation through text messages, through phone calls or voice notes. Those things don't work. It's got to be face-to-face, one-on-one, eye-to-eye, where they can pick up heart and motive and where we can debate and negotiate. So important that. And of course, the venue is also important. You have the wrong venue and it doesn't lend itself to a good conversation. It can actually, the venue itself can also be hostile. So we must remember that our intentions determine our actions. The heart must surely be to determine truth. That's what we're looking for. We're wanting to find out what truth is. And to seek either correction, that's if it's, for instance, church discipline or something like that, or more particularly, reconciliation and redemption. So those are the issues that really need to be on our heart. Too often what happens is when we go into areas of conflict and confrontation, there's a hostility in it. What we want to do is win the argument. We want to draw first blood. And that kind of thing is not going to win. It's not going to be a win-win for both parties. In doing this, if you look at politics today, it's so terrible. You look at name-calling, accusations, and they degenerate into this massive hostility. So we must never undermine another person's dignity. We never do that. It's just a no-no. As a Christian, it just should not be in our heart to undermine another person's dignity through name-calling and those kind of things. And so if we're only going into the battle to win, and we're not looking for solutions, what we're trying to do is just look for a scalp, then we should rather take up karate or boxing or something like that. So seeking to negotiate through diplomacy rather than from brutal decapitation, that is the heart of it. So you can see what I'm saying here. It's really hard issues here. We need to have prepared our heart and got our attitudes right, determined what is in the heart, deal with that first, pray it through. It's also wise perhaps to determine in dealing with these things whether there's a pattern here or if it's just an event. So there's more grace in something if it's just an event. But where there's a pattern, patterns cannot always be excused away. So patterns will obviously result from maybe flaws in character and that kind of thing. Maybe there's certain issues there that need to be dealt with as well. So the issues of the heart clearly give evidence of our Christian maturity. And how do you judge that? Through the R&R principle. So the R&R principle is a very simple principle. What it means is that when something happens to us, there's an immediate reaction. Normally, it's a bit of hostility in it. We want to hit back, fight back. So the reaction is the first and the initial reaction that takes place when something happens to us. The second R in the R&R is the response. So the time delay between your reaction and your response actually is an indication of our maturity. For instance, you might have heard of siblings who haven't spoken to each other for years because of a difference of opinion earlier on, and now they don't speak to each other, and there's this long period. There's just been no response, and that obviously speaks about maturity. So the shorter the gap between the reaction and the response is indicative of our Christian maturity. So the reaction, as I say, is normally a negative one. The response is something that needs to be calculated. In other words, we withdraw a little bit, we get our heart right, we deal with our attitudes, we pray, we seek God's heart in this thing. And that's the response. What is the godly response that we need to bring into this thing? We must remember there's no harm in agreeing to disagree. Sometimes there will be no resolution, and we can agree to disagree as long as we do that amicably. And obviously forgiveness can often play a major role in the handling of conflict, but that's a separate subject. So you can see all of these things are heart issues. Your heart and your visible actions either qualify your views or discredit your case. So it's very, very important to get your heart right. The things we need to do in that period between the reaction and the response, we should really prepare our hearts. We go before God and say, God, if there's stuff in my heart here that is not right, please, Lord, deal with me. Help me with my heart, Lord. Help me get through the hurt, the brokenness in it. And then obviously, secondly, which is also very difficult, is to pray for our adversary. And that's not to pray that their teeth be broken or anything like that, but to pray for them, pray for understanding for them, pray for a soft heart, that kind of thing. So the question is, what are we seeking? Are we wanting truth? That's really part of the conflict resolution, is to find out what is the truth in this thing. What is the absolute truth here? Not just what we perceive to be truth. You see, we see things as we are. We don't often see things as they are. And therefore, what we need to do is just examine our own heart and say, do we want absolute truth? And of course, justice to prevail, or righteousness, or whatever it is. So where there is division, we must want reconciliation and restoration. You can see it demands incredible maturity from our side. When it's a case of church discipline, for instance, then we really do want them to know that we're seeking the very best for them. It's not punishment we're looking for. It's correction that we're looking for. Correct actions, correct responses. And so whilst holding them accountable for their actions or words, we need to ensure that they still understand that we care for them. We want the very best for them. And that, of course, takes some wisdom. So clarity of mind comes when you don't get embroiled with emotion. And that's the main thing today, is people come into these conflict areas with deep emotion, harsh words, that kind of thing. They try to manipulate, they name calling, all of those things. Emotion is the main thing. You've got to take that right out of ourselves. When we give our response and we need to sit down and work it through with people, it must be without emotion. People very, very quickly read our hearts. They read our emotions and our intentions. Within the first few minutes, they'll pick up exactly what it is you're coming to do. And if you're coming with a tender heart, you're coming not necessarily with compromise, but you're coming there because you really want to hear their side of the story. So as I say, name callings, accusations, or statements like you always, or you never, or you did, are destructive and will negatively impact every single case. And so we must also try to avoid approaching difficult confrontations when we're tired and hungry and that sort of thing. And I've mentioned venue too. Venue is also an important thing. But always maintain the dignity of the other. If we're looking for resolution, or we're looking for a scalp to hang onto our belt. And if anybody gets angry, and at that point in time, they're not listening, and the opportunity is lost. So you can see here, it's a lot of heart in this thing. I think an important maxim for us to always remember is that everything is not as it seems. Everything is not as it seems. In other words, we don't have the full picture. We likely don't have all of the facts. And so we need to attempt to understand their views and their actions. What are the reasons that they're handling it this way? What are the reasons they're believing what they do? Dudley Daniel has written a good book called Choosing Your Battles. In that he talks about the kind of battles we need to fight and how we need to fight them. And he brings in the Matthew 18 principle. So we're not going to deal with it in any detail here, but Matthew 18 from verse 15 basically says if you've got anything against anyone else, you go directly to them. You don't bring in other people right in the beginning. You try to resolve it one-on-one with them. But go through Matthew 18 and you can see the principles involved there. And so another good response would be to assume that everybody is trying to do their best. There's faults in this thing. What we want to do is try to expose those and try to bring resolution to it. So a critical heart is not a helpful starting point. So next time what we're going to do is just have a look at the meeting itself and work out our strategy in it. But as you can see, the important aspect here is dealing with ourselves, our attitude, our tone, our body language. What we've got to do is when we go into negotiation and dealing with issues like this, our attitude is absolutely critical. The hard issues, whatever's in the heart, remember, comes out of the mouth. And what we've got to do is deal with these hard issues first. And so the initial reaction is a negative one, the first R. That's a negative reaction. And then what we need to do is have a calculated response. God, how would you want me to deal with this thing? How do I go into this thing, Lord, intending for the best for both of us? So we'll carry on sharing next time. God bless you.